The gender war is what is known as a dialectic manipulation. This is a divide and conquer mind control strategy that is employed by social engineers and mind controllers. So what is dialectics? What does dialectic mean? The word dialectic is derived from the Greek preposition dia, meaning through or by way of, by means of, and the Latin noun lectus, which means choice. So literally, dialectics is a methodology of control that works through choice, by way of some people on one side of a divide taking a side and making a choice and then taking action based on that, and people on the other side of the issue or the divide making a choice and then acting upon that choice. It's like the political party system that we have in the United States and many other so-called free countries. It's really a one-party system, but they're giving you the illusion that it's a two-party system, and they're ultimately taking everyone to the slaughterhouse regardless of which party they choose. So the dialectic in neo-feminism is largely between people who believe that there's a patriarchy and people who believe that there should be a matriarchy. And, you know, if you look at the words, what do they have in common? Archy, meaning rulership, control over other people, or in other words, slavery, from the Greek archon, which means master over a slave. You know, the other commonality here is the control system itself, you know, to use a Game of Thrones analogy here. Great show, by the way. You know, it doesn't matter who's sitting on that throne. The concept to keep in mind here is there's a throne to be sat upon, which needs to be destroyed and eradicated. And we need the concept of authority needs to go in our society. I always give this analogy to the situation. You know, people, a lot of, you know, alternative historians and researchers want to say, well, World War II was a big manipulated war. Yes, it was. Of course, international bankers were involved in manipulating both sides. But here's the thing. Who did they really manipulate first? They manipulated the Axis powers, and specifically the Nazis, got them all whipped into a religious fervor to wage war on the large portion of the European continent. So the question becomes, well, you know, how long do we let this manipulated dialect go on for? You could make the claim, oh, well, they were all manipulated and under mind control, under a religious form of mind control called Nazism. Well, does that change the difference in what they were actually getting done through their actions? You know, if somebody is performing great violence upon other people, do you say, oh my God, they're under mind control? I realize that they're falling for a dialectic manipulation and they're completely manipulated and under mind control. So does that mean you just let their actions go on unchecked? You know, it's like the current police state that we're dealing with in America. Well, everybody says, well, the police are just under mind control. They think what they're doing is right. They think they're just doing their jobs. Well, does that mean you just let them continue to stomp all over your rights for eternity? You know? And because you realize that they happen to be manipulated and under mind control, well, no action should be taken. Well, you're just going to let them do it. See, the concept to keep in mind here is both sides don't have to fall for the manipulation. Only one side of a dialectic needs to fall for the manipulation in order for the dialectic manipulation to be successful. Because they believe in their minds that they have an enemy and they're waging war on that enemy already. So once one side buys into the dialectic, it's on. The war is on. The other side has one of two choices. They either have to convince the other side that they're under complete mind control and manipulation, and that other side has to be willing to listen to reason and change their behavior as a result, or there has to be a conflict. There has to be a choice that is made. People can be pulled into a dialectic legitimately. You know, I'll take fighting a war against people who are waging a war on freedom, even if I know they're under mind control. Doesn't matter. The end result is the same if freedom's going to die. The end result is the same if freedom's going to die. You know, so it doesn't make a difference if somebody has bought the manipulation. That doesn't excuse the behavior and mean that no action should be taken regarding it. So keep that in mind. That's how this gender war is being played off. And I'm not taking sides, but I am saying one of the sides is deeply buying into this gender war manipulation. And now they're getting the opposite effect in place where men are responding to that in very reactive ways, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow. There is no bigger dialectic breakdown. There's no bigger dialectic divide than men versus women. There's no religion isn't a bigger divide. There's lots more religions. And it's a skewed percentage. It's not a 50-50 percentage, you know? Political divides, you know? There's one party, another party, and there's people who don't buy into either, and then there's people who follow, you know, independent candidates, etc. That's not a 50-50 divide. There is no divide in humanity that is exactly 50-50. And the social engineers know that. That's why they specifically focused their efforts on cultivating this gender war, because it's the only place where this 50-50 divide exists. And through it, they can create maximum social tension, because the fabric of a society is the familial bond between man and woman. Make no mistake about that. That's why they're trying to wage this gender war, to create maximum divide and maximum social tension, instability, and chaos amongst people. This presentation is ultimately solution-oriented, and the solutions will be talked about tomorrow night. It is not presented to incite a further divide between men and women, as I've already said, but to promote awareness of the manipulation tactics being employed against both genders. The final part of this presentation will focus upon solutions that we can implement to heal the divide between the genders and to promote unified relationships. The neo-feminism agenda and the gender war that it is waging is a form of eugenics. Now, I know most of the people in this room know about eugenics, but a lot of the people that perhaps are listening to this information for the first time don't know about eugenics or what it is. The word eugenics is derived from the Greek adjective eugenes, meaning well-born, which is in turn derived from the Greek adjective eu, meaning good, and the Greek noun genos, meaning race or stock. Eugenics is a social ideology advocating the promotion of higher rates of sexual reproduction for people with traits and characteristics desired by its proponents, and reduced rates of sexual reproduction and sterilization for those with undesired traits and characteristics. This practice could be described as a main religious tenet of the ruling class, who believe that it is simply the quote-unquote natural order for the most ruthless of humans, whose genes in their minds are the quote fittest, to rule the rest of the human herd. They see themselves as a quote elite class of human beings who attained the highest positions of power in the world because they are genetically superior to those they rule over. Ultimately, this psychopathic ruling class believe that they have every right to decide who is allowed to live and procreate and who must die. You know, we've seen this ideology propagated in the past through wars and political agendas that really are an agenda of religious fervor, if you look much deeper into it. And what ultimately the religion that underlies eugenics is Satanism. The biggest form of eugenics that is being waged upon the human population right now, aside from the neo-feminism agenda, is abortion. I mean, it's such a hardcore war that's being waged, especially against minority populations. I mean, over half of the African-American population's pregnancies in the United States end in abortion. More babies are being aborted than born. Operations like Planned Parenthood are directly involved in eugenics. And many of the people involved in the boards of organizations like that make no bones about it, that they are eugenicists and they think the population needs to be culled. The dark occultists of this world are practically coming out in the open and telling people that they want to cull them. You know, building monuments to eugenics. as the Georgia Guidestones are. Right on the stones it says, maintain humanity under 500 million in what they think of as perpetual balance with nature. Now that's perpetual balance with a satanic mindset, that there's an elite class that can consider themselves God on earth. That's what that is. That's an elimination of over 95% of the human population. And believe me, if they could get that done today, they would do it. And they're working toward it. I want to talk a little bit about something that Jay Parker talked about, which is epigenetics. And there's a lot of researchers that if you guys don't know about, I'm sure people in this room do, but a lot of people listening at home, they need to do the work and do the research and look into this topic, because it's not only fascinating, it's critical to understand. The word epigenetics is derived from the Greek prefix epi, meaning beyond, further than, or past, and the Latin verb genere, which means to make or to create. So you put them together and it means beyond the genes, beyond the creative aspect. It's that which goes beyond our genes. Epigenetics is an emerging branch of science that takes human consciousness into direct consideration regarding the biological, psychological, and physiological expressions of human life and human society. The science of epigenetics clearly demonstrates that human beings possess the ability to create adaptive changes to their gene expressions via changes in consciousness. Genes have been proven to be only a tendency for biological expression. Since consciousness precedes the genetic expression in the physical domain, if consciousness is changed, then the gene expression in the physical domain can be fundamentally altered. In other words, can we actually alter our genes and our genetic code through an alteration in our consciousness? And the answer is yes. This has been proven by this new emerging science. You know, I thought the word epigenetics had actually been scrubbed by mainstream media, but I shocked myself in doing some of the research for this presentation, because I found that Time magazine, of all publications, actually did a front story piece on epigenetics in January of 2010. Epigenetics has shown that human beings are not controlled by genes like computer programs are controlled by computer code. This is a fallacy that is propagated by Darwinian scientism and the whole theory of evolution, of the survival of the fittest or the most ruthless, for almost 2 centuries. When we work to change our consciousness and our beliefs, our biological and psychological code can actually be rewritten, and a different expression can be manifested. In other words, we are not our genetic code. That is not who we are. We are the writers of our genetic code. We are the authors of our genes. And they can be re-expressed if we re-express our consciousness. If fully grasped by humanity, this fundamental understanding could help us to radically transform our world for the better. And here are just 3, there's many others, but just 3 researchers who I feel take this science and put it into very easily understood terms that the layman, the non-scientist, can really deeply understand. And that is Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote the book, The Biology of Belief, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who wrote the book, Breaking the Habit of Healing Yourself, and Greg Braden, who wrote The Spontaneous Healing of Belief, among many others. I highly suggest the work. Now, let me qualify this as well. There's going to be some other researchers that I'll talk about tomorrow that, you know, I don't have to agree with everything these guys think or talk about. I can put you on to some information that you have to be discerning about. You have to look at what is true and good and needs to be further explored in their research. And if they talk about some things that you don't fully agree with, well, then you have to use your own judgment and discernment. You have to let that go and weed out the inconsistencies. I'm telling you, their work on epigenetics is brilliant, and it needs to be understood by humanity. epigenetic eugenics. Okay? So now we're taking eugenics, the control over the population, into the epigenetic domain. Follow me here, okay? This is eugenics that is waged through the manipulation of consciousness. That is possible. It's not only possible, it's being done. What if an occult ruling class long ago discovered how to influence the breeding process within entire populations for the purpose of making those populations easier for them to control? In other words, controlling human breeding by manipulating human consciousness to get the characteristics of the next generation to come out the way the ruling class wants those characteristics to come out. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, human farming. Because that is what the control class, the social engineer class, consider themselves. They consider themselves farmers of the human herd of cattle. That's how they view us. That's how they view you. This is population control through mind control. Population control waged through mind control. That's when we take the sugar coating off and call it what it really is. I have truncated or shortened these terms. Instead of calling it epigenetic eugenics, I refer to it as epi-eugenics. It's taking eugenics to the next level. Going beyond is what epi means when we put it in front as a prefix on a word. So we're going beyond classical physical eugenics that involved force, direct violence, and sterilization of human beings, okay? Now we're taking it into the epigenetic realm, the realm of consciousness and the realm of mind control and manipulation. Epi-eugenics is the propagation of eugenics by way of social engineering or mind control, and selective breeding by the very population which the eugenics strategy is targeted to destroy. The people who the eugenics strategy is targeted to wean or to cull is actually performing this very selective breeding process. And they have been convinced that it is actually in their best interest to perform that culling upon themselves. And that's what's happening in our society, folks. That is going on actively as we're sitting here. Eugenics, epi-eugenics, one could call it mind-controlled downbreeding. Mind-controlled downbreeding. Or in other words, getting the human herd to cull itself. That's what the social engineers of our world have actually accomplished. And I'm going to explain how it works. It is very important to understand that eugenics is not just about population reduction. It is ultimately about controlling which characteristics are expressed in human society. By breeding certain desired characteristics into the gene pool and breeding certain undesirable characteristics out of the gene pool. That's how eugenics is performed. Okay? It's not just about killing off a bunch of people. It's if you want a society to go in a certain direction and you want certain characteristics in the members of that society, you have to influence the breeding of those characteristics. And you have to influence the outbreeding of the characteristics you no longer want in it. The social engineers of our society, however, ladies and gentlemen, this may come as a big shock to you, are not actually eugenicists. They are not actually performing eugenics, okay? They are actually performing dysgenics.